We're here today to talk about is this book and the concepts in it called Hope is Dope. I've been working with addiction for 15 years now and developed a concept that I've found to be especially effective in working with particularly opiate addicts. And what we're here to talk about today is that, the difficult, confusing, complex subject that is addiction. We're going to try to take it, make it more simple and understandable. Now, this isn't a chemistry test. This is not something that I'm going to be too specific. I'm going to be fairly general. And I want to make it understandable for you. I like to say it doesn't take a brain scientist to understand brain science. We're going to make it readily understandable for you. So please ask questions. This is for addicts, but it's also for addicts and their families. Okay, it's for anybody who's interested in this topic. It's time to make this information readily available in a way such that people can recognize there is a pathway out of addiction. That's the goal, that's what we're working on, and that's what we're here today to talk about. So, what we've done is taken this complex subject and broke it into 7 parts. I'm going to go through each of these 7 parts today. They're all very understandable, simple things that people have all heard of before. And once you understand the concept and how I put it into addiction and recovery, hopefully it'll make more sense for you, okay? Your job is to ask questions and ask for clarifications, give some commentary if you want, and we'll just go from there. Okay, so concept number 1. Pharmacy. If I asked you what a pharmacy is, what would you say?
Place where you pick up medication.
Okay. Drugs, right? Pick up drugs there. Are there a lot of pharmacies around?
Yes.
Okay. Throughout the United States, there's probably, I don't know, tens of thousands or something like that. What if I told you there were 100 billion pharmacies in the United States? Would you think that was a lot?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What if I told you you had 100 billion pharmacies inside your head? That would be interesting, right? Okay, why? Why is that? What do you find in pharmacies? You get medicines there, you get drugs there, okay? Your brain is a pharmacy, and inside your brain you have 100 billion little cells, brain cells, called neurons. And inside those cells are drugs. Now, the scientific term for it is neurotransmitters. For our purposes, just think drugs, think medicines, okay? The only reason why drugs work and then why medicines work is because they're found naturally in their brain. I'm going to show you how that works in a minute. There's at least 40 different types of neurotransmitters. Scientists are finding more every once in a while, but they've really figured out about 30 of them really well. But we're going to talk about just a couple of them and one in specific. They all have different shapes. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But there's 3 different types of neurotransmitters that I just want to reference. One's called endorphins, one's called dopamine, and another's called GABA. And each of these are found in your brain, and they have a shape. For our purposes today, we're going to talk about endorphins having a square-like shape, dopamine having a triangle shape, and GABA having a circle shape. And they're all found naturally occurring in your brain. Now, they get released inside the neuron. They get released through this thing called an axon. When you're a kid, it happens on days that you're having a lot of joy, for example. Christmas morning for a lot of people is a joyful day. What types of emotions do kids have on Christmas morning?
Oh, surprise.
Excitement,
Anxiety.
Okay, well, let's stick with surprise and excitement for a minute. That's dopamine. The excitement feeling you get is when your brain is producing a lot of dopamine. What other feeling? After you get a gift that they really like, and then the family has a nice dinner, and there's a lot of love in the room, right? Is that a good warm feeling?
Yes.
This the brain is producing endorphins. And you put these 2 things together, when the brain's producing endorphins and the brain's producing dopamine, it's a really good feeling. And this is what kids experience naturally when things are going fairly well. You mentioned anxiety. The brain has another chemical in it called GABA, which it's gamma aminobutyric acid. It specifically is in your brain to reduce anxiety. And it reduces anxiety when it's released in the brain during certain events or experiences or thoughts. Stuff like deep breathing, for example. GABA is very similar to benzodiazepines. What are benzodiazepines?
anti-anxiety agents.
Right. Well, GABA is your body's natural anti-anxiety agent. Dopamine gets released in high amounts when people use stimulants. What stimulants can you get off the street?
Coffee.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, it is a drug, indeed.
Cocaine.
Cocaine. Cocaine dramatically increases the dopamine availability in the brain. Endorphins stands for endogenous morphine. Endogenous means inside the body or within the body. What's morphine?
It's a pain suppressant.
Yeah, it's a painkiller. Endogenous morphine means morphine inside the body, and it's naturally occurring inside the brain. And how it works is once the body produces these chemicals and it's released through this axon, the square goes over into the square-shaped receptor, and you have an endorphin effect or a pain suppressant effect. If dopamine gets released, it also goes through this is called the synapse, by the way, the area between these. That triangle docks on the triangle receptor, and then you have an excited feeling. And with the GABA, it also gets released, and it fits into the circle receptor, and then you have an anti-anxiety feeling, okay? So the only reasons why drugs work or medicines work is because pharmacists were able to figure out how to mimic these types of things. We're going to explain that in a little bit greater detail with opiates in a second, but that's how it works. Your brain is a pharmacy. You have a whole bunch of naturally occurring drugs in your brain. When you're a kid, they work fairly well. Unfortunately, when we grow up, things start to change, and we get introduced to different experiences, which often lead to different emotional states, lots of anxiety, sometimes depression, anger, and we start to experience different things. And we also experience the availability of street drugs. So if I asked you, what's a hijacking? What would you tell me?
It's where something is taken over against its will, if you will.
There you go. Something takes control of something else, okay? And it changes the circumstance for the person who's now being controlled. Well, drugs hijack the brain. How does that happen? Just so happens that heroin and pain pills have the same shape as endorphins. The same basic shape. Somebody grab me those keys there for a second, please. So if we're looking at a car key, and there's a shape or a cut on these keys, these are like neurotransmitters. Each of these have a different shape. Well, the square shape that we have here, represents the endorphins, which goes into the receptor for endorphins. The square shape happens to be a very similar shape to what heroin is. And pain pills like Oxys and Vicodin and Percocet, those types of medicines, they're all squares. So we have a shape of a key like this. And the meds, or the drugs that fit into the brain, also have a similar shape. Now, this is an important distinction. All of this stuff off the rest of the keychain here doesn't matter, does it? This is the part that goes into the ignition. That's all that matters. The part that fits into the receptor creates an effect. That's all that matters. So what happens? When people start to experience emotional states or they want to party or they want to reduce anxiety or depression or whatever the case may be, and they take something like heroin, the heroin comes from outside the body, it goes into the synapse, and it docks into the exact same receptor that endorphins go to. Goes to the same place. So what effect, if it's the same shape, what effect does it have? If I went to a store and I got my car key duplicated, will it still work in my ignition? Yeah. Well, whatever type of square I can fit into there, guess what I'm going to have? I'm going to have an endorphin-like effect. What are endorphins again? What do they do in the brain?
Endogenous morphine, they suppress pain.
Suppress pain. So heroin and pain pills, when they get in there, because they have the same basic shape as the endorphin, they fit into the same receptor area, they suppress pain. That's the only way it works. These squares, can I fit this car key into your ignition?
Probably not.
It wouldn't work so well. I couldn't turn it on, right? Can I fit this square into this triangle receptor? Or the square into the circle receptor? No, it doesn't work like that. These squares are just designed for the squares. Turns out drugs and meds have the same basic shape. In this case with opioids, it's the same shape as the endorphin that's naturally occurring in the brain. So, the hijacking is when something takes control of something else. When the person introduces a heroin or a painkiller into the body, when they introduce it, it hijacks the brain. Now, it does so in a way that is actually much more relatable and understandable than most people think. What happens when a human being takes in too much food? Now, these areas are called receptors again, and I want you to think of them for a moment like a stomach. If I take too much food and put it into my stomach, what happens to the stomach?
It expands.
Gets bigger. Why do they get bigger?
because we fill it with food.
Right, and it needs to get bigger to take on the additional food you're putting in there. What if I shove more food into there? What will happen to the stomach?
Stretch.
Keeps getting bigger. And now when the stomach is empty, what is the signal being sent to the brain?
Feed me.
Yeah.
You're hungry.
Yeah, you're hungry because you got a big empty stomach. Well, when an addict or anybody that's using opiates takes it, puts it into the brain, it's like the stomach grows, but in this case, new receptors grow. New square-shaped receptors. Why? Same thing with the food. It's got extra endorphin-like substance coming into the body, and it needs some place to put it, and so we grow new receptors. It's called upregulation. We grow new receptors. And that's so that all of this heroin or painkiller can be taken into the body. This is a hijacking, because once that take goes into the body, just like this person whose stomach gets too big, what signal gets sent to the brain? Feed me. When somebody uses opiates and they use them too much and too long, it's like eating too much food. After a while, there's a chemical change that happens in the body. This, by the way, is the disease. This is where the disease happens. What is a disease? It's a chemical change on the cellular level. Well, when the brain cells change and take on new receptor formations, now we've got a disease. Just like a stomach is bigger, sends a signal to you saying to eat, the heroin addict who ends up with additional receptors has the same sort of thing. This is called craving. And if you have more receptors inside your brain, what do you feel like doing? Using more. It's also tolerance. The more receptors I have, I can keep drawing these, the more receptors I have, the higher desire I have to use opiates. Okay, there is a nasty side effect that comes along with this, and this is really the problem, what happens with opiate dependence. It's called hibernation. What's hibernation?
Sleep.
Storage.
Sleep. Well, storage works too, because this is actually what receptors do. They store for sure. The sleep aspect, think of a hibernating bear. This is very valuable for an opiate addict. Is a hibernating bear dead?
No.
No. Is a hibernating bear inactive?
Yes.
Yes. When the body takes on all this additional opiate, the heroin, pain pills, whatever they may be, the side effect is that these endorphins hibernate. They go to sleep. Why would that be? What if your body keeps producing endorphins while you're taking on all this additional opiate? What would happen in your brain? The problem would just get worse. In fact, you'd probably overdose. It's your body's natural way of saying, wait, we got way too much of this endorphin stuff in here. We need to reduce the amount of this endorphin. You keep shoving it into your body, or your loved one keeps shoving it into their brain, so your body actually shuts down its endorphin production. So one of the most valuable things of this group we call Hope is Dope, I like to use different terminology for people. I don't like drug addict and all the other negative words. I like to call it what it is. You have a hibernating endorphin problem, or a sleeping endorphin problem. That's the real issue. Why? Once these endorphins go to sleep, remember when we said, think about when you're a kid or anytime you're happy, feeling good, feeling love, those types of feelings, those go to sleep. Now you can't feel those feelings anymore. They're inactive. Christmas morning doesn't feel like a big deal anymore. You fall out of love with all the things that you love. Whatever those things that you love, whatever they may be. I remember talking to a person years ago about, she was in active addiction, and I asked her what she loved to do. She said she loved to dance. And I said, oh, okay, so you dance regularly? She goes, no, I haven't danced for a couple years. Why not? It didn't feel good to her anymore. Your own feelings of love actually go away. They're now asleep, hibernating endorphins. This is the side effect. What happens? It intensifies this hijacking process. You have all these additional receptors, and then you have sleeping endorphins. Now what's an addict to do? They can't produce the drug themselves, endogenous morphine, they can't do it. They have all these additional receptors, and so they're like, well, I need to use heroin and Vikes and Oxys. That's what they need to do. And so in order to feel good, because it's a painkiller, that's what it is. What happens if you don't have any of your natural painkiller in your body? Guess what you feel?
Pain.
A lot of pain, exactly right. This is the withdrawal experience. When people try to stop using, oh, here's an idea, you got a problem. Let's stop using heroin and pain pills. Let's stop that. Look at the system. I don't have endorphins anymore. I have all these additional receptors. And now I'm trying not to use painkiller. So how do you feel? You feel the worst you've ever felt in your life. Everything hurts in your body. right? Everything hurts. And then your loved ones say to you, stop using. To me, that's extremely similar to telling a person to stop eating. After a couple days of not eating, what else can you think about other than food? Really? All you can do is think of food. Well, when an addict is told just stop using, and then they can't because the body's sending the signal to them saying you have to use, you have to eat. Your body's depending upon it. That's why it's called a chemical dependence. Your body needs this to function. And you don't have the natural stuff anymore because they're hibernating. And you're told by your loved ones, oh, you know what you need to do is just stop using. That'll make it easy. And then they tell you it's a willpower thing. That's like, don't eat for 3 days and don't think of food. And people tell you don't think of food. You know, it's just willpower. No, you don't. It's not a willpower thing anymore. It's a biological process. It is a disease. It's happened there, and it's now out of control because you've been hijacked. Granted, you let the hijacker onto the plane. Or the carjacker into the car. Yeah, that's the mistake. Once you've done that, crossed that line, that's an issue. But then it spirals out of control from there. Right? That's the hibernation. So again, think of the terminology. It's a hibernating endorphin problem. Another concept that leads perfect to this is the idea of debt. Somebody tell me what financial debt is.
You owe more than you owe people or institutions money.
Right, and you owe more than you're making.
Right.
Okay? So if you made $50,000 a year and you spent $70,000, you fall into $20,000 of debt pretty quickly, right? So if you want to get out of debt, what's the solution? To just stop spending money? Would that help to stop spending money?
It helps.
Are you out of debt though?
Make more.
You need to make more, exactly. You can't just stop spending money. That's like me going to the bank saying, I know you had $20,000. But I've got it under control. I've stopped overspending. They don't go, okay, we're good now. They say, no, you got to pay up. You still got to pay $20,000 in order to make it right. So there's two sides to the debt. One is the making the money, and the other is to stop spending. Well, the opiate debt works like this. The spending too much is the using of the opiates, right? Whenever you use too much opiate, you're using more opiates than you have receptors for, you create a debt. You create all these additional receptors, and now you've got a bit of an issue. If you just stopped spending money, or if you just stopped using opiates, you haven't solved the problem. You've addressed half of the problem. This is why relapse happens so often. People think if I just stop using, things will be good again. Things don't go back to baseline when you just stop using again. If I've overspent and I get $20,000 on a hole, the bank expects the money from me. Or think dealers too, you know? If you owe your dealer money, they tend to be forgiving. No, they want paid, don't they? Well, the brain, it's an amazing thing, but one thing it isn't is particularly forgiving. I call it neurochemical karma. Once you've got this established, you don't just, oh, I quit, I'm good now. No, because you got to pay the man. It's still there. You have all these additional receptors, and you have all these sleeping endorphins. By the way, I drew one here. You know, you've got millions, maybe billions of these things in your brain, but if they're all sluggish and they're not filling the receptors, man, you got a lot of receptor issues, or you got a lot of neurotransmitter issues. So the problem isn't just stopping spending, it's making more money. You do not have an opiate problem as much as you have an opiate debt. An endorphin debt. There's an important distinction there. And to try to get out of financial debt, and you think I'll just stop overspending and that'll be good, that's not enough. And we'll address that specifically coming up in a little bit. All right, crutches. This is where the medicines come into play. And what can help in opiate addiction. What are crutches?
They supplement or support someone who has a bad limb, a bad
Okay.
leg.
So if you break a leg, you go to the doctor, and the doctor notices you've got a problem. He'll give you a crutch. Do crutches help?
Sure.
Do they cure you?
No.
No. How do they specifically work? They provide support while you heal, right? Can you use crutches wrong?
Yes.
Yeah.
How can you use them wrong? You laughed, so now you got to
If
speak.
you're uncoordinated.
Yeah, okay, right. You can use them incorrectly and trip. One way to do that is if you have crutches that are too big or too small for you.
Size, right.
You need the right size crutches, okay? Can you use crutches every other day if you have a broken leg?
No.
Did you use them all the time? If you had crutches, could you punt footballs with them? Was that a good idea?
No.
Or how about letting your buddy use crutches while you have the broken leg? Would that make sense?
No.
All right. Is it a bad idea to use crutches if you have a broken leg?
No.
So let's get out of our minds forever people in the field of addiction who say that medicines like methadone and Suboxone and those types of medicines are bad because they're crutches and they're a substitute. They're definitely a substitute, but they're substitute like a wooden crutch is for a broken leg. And if it's used correctly, it's going to help you heal. And we're going to go through that in a minute. But don't blame the crutch if it's used incorrectly. When methadone and Suboxone are used correctly, they're wonderful medicines when they're used correctly. Problem is they can be used incorrectly, and a lot of people do. How do people use medicines like that incorrectly? Use them every other day. Let their buddy use them. Use the wrong amount. Same sort of thing. You got to be on the right amount of medicine. You got to take it as prescribed, and you got to take it. Don't let your buddy do it. Like I said, punting footballs with a broken leg. What if you take benzodiazepines while you're trying to take other medicines, if you're taking them illicitly in particular? That's like punting a football with a broken leg. You're going to continue to mess up the system. Crutches are wonderful when they're used well. If they're not used well, not going to heal. If I keep walking around on a broken leg, I'm going to continue with a broken leg. That's also what relapse is too, you know, when you make some mistakes. Then you'll learn, got to use the crutches correctly. So what happens when you have a broken leg and you use the crutches correctly and your leg heals? What happens? What do you do with the crutches?
Throw them away.
You're done with them, right? So if you use medicines correctly, and we've been doing Suboxone here for a long time, it works great when people use them correctly. If you use it correctly, it's a wonderful medicine. If it's used incorrectly, it's not the medicine's fault. Okay? Nobody blames the crutches if somebody is using them incorrectly. All right? Not the crutch's fault. So meds are perfectly useful if they're used correctly. Does this mean you have to use crutches? Do you have to use a med to get off opiates?
No.
If I asked you what basic shape do you think that the medicines like Suboxone and methadone are, what do you think the basic shape is?
Square.
It's a square, right. Guess how it works. It also fits into the receptor. It fits in the exact same receptor that endorphins fit into, that heroin fits into, that Vicodins and oxys, it fits into the same receptor. It just does so a little differently, okay? Now, if I had a car key example works as well. If I change this just a little teeny tiny bit, would it still probably work? Well, if I cut a couple atoms off of it, it would work still. Now, if I cut it in half, it wouldn't work. But if I change it just a little bit, it'll still fit into the ignition. I wrote down some of the chemical compositions. Now, if I asked you the chemical composition of water, you guys all know that, right? What's the chemical composition of water?
H2O.
H2O. What's the H stand for?
Hydrogen.
What's the 2 stand for?
2 parts.
Two
Parts of hydrogen.
particles of, of hydrogen. And the O?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. So I wrote down here for you a couple different opiates and a medicine in there, methadone, and, well, medicines if they're used correctly. And look at the chemical composition of heroin compared to methadone. What is C?
Carbon.
Carbon, H, hydrogen, N,
Nitrogen.
nitrogen, oxygen. Okay? So you have 21 parts carbon, 23 parts hydrogen, 1 part nitrogen, 5 parts oxygen. Look at methadone. 21 parts carbon, 27 parts hydrogen, 1 part nitrogen, 4 parts oxygen. It actually has the exact same amount of particles in it. Look how extremely similar those two things are. I wrote a couple more down. There's Oxycontin. Notice, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, Vicodin, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. It's extremely similar. C18, C18, H21, H21, N1, N1, O4, O3. You remove one oxygen atom from Oxycontin, now you got Vicodin. If you ever wondered how pharmaceutical companies find their medicines and how do they do that, they're just messing with chemistry. I'm sure they've tried every single possible combination, and a whole lot of rats have died in the name of science, right? But you mess with the combinations, and if it fits and it works, then they got a new medicine. That's how they do it. What is it that we need to understand? It is extremely similar. In the same sort of way that a crutch is similar to a leg, right? Sort of like the bone inside a leg, and you have a broken bone, and the wood sort of represents a non-broken bone. That's the idea. So here's the medicines, and there's the drugs. Same basic shape. Now, how do they work? When you change the chemistry a little bit, something like half-life comes into play. Who knows what half-life is? Anybody?
The amount of medication that's left in half its lifespan.
Well, very good. Okay, so half-lives can be different. Now, think of it this way. If I had a rock and a piece of bread and a piece of lettuce, and I put them all on the floor here, and I said, all right, which one's going to last the longest?
The rock.
Yeah. Why? Because its half-life is much longer. What's the half-life of a piece of bread? I mean, how long does it take for a piece of bread to start to deteriorate? And how long does it take for lettuce to deteriorate? If it came back in a year, what would I see on the floor if I had a rock, a piece of bread, and a piece of lettuce? What would I see?
A rock and mold.
Yeah, right. And lettuce would be long gone, dust. The bread would probably be like mold, and the rock, which has a much longer half-life, would look like the exact same. Well, these medicines and these drugs have different half-lives. The half-life that it takes for heroin to burn up inside the brain is, anybody know, have a guess? How long does it take for heroin to get...
8 hours.
Yeah, well, in that time, 4 to 8 hours, that kind of thing, the amount of heroin they originally took deteriorates by half. That's what half-life means. So in that time frame. So it's like if you eat a cheeseburger, how many hours later before it's like half gone? A couple hours. 8 hours later, you're hungry again because now it's all gone. That's how it happens in the brain. So medicines work because they have different half-life. The half-life of methadone is about 24 hours. So it lasts in the receptor, like food in the stomach, it lasts in the receptor about 4 times longer than does heroin. The half-life of Suboxone, anybody know?
36 hours?
There you go. Some say it's up to 72 hours, which means once you put Suboxone inside the system, it stays in the brain much longer. Does that heal you? Remember, we're talking about crutches here. Does it heal you once you've got methadone or Suboxone inside the brain? Does it heal you?
No.
What does it do?
Stabilizes you.
Stabilizes you because it takes away that craving. If I were able to fill up all these different receptors now, if I'm taking a medicine and I fill up those different receptors, what happens to my craving state?
Goes away.
Yeah, it's now subsided. Do I have to use now? No. In fact, with the craving state reduced because of the medicine, if I try to use, the medicine actually acts as a blocker because it's once the opioid receptor is occupied, the heroin won't fit in anymore. And by the way, drugs, medicines like Narcan, what they do is they flush out all of this stuff. So if you were to take Narcan while using a medicine or while you're on heroin, it actually goes in and it knocks clear all these receptors. That's why you go into instant withdrawal. That's what that's about. If anybody have ever been Narcan, not a pleasant experience, right? So this is how meds work. Half-life matters, but it doesn't heal you because it only occupies the receptor for a certain amount of time. It gives you exactly that back. It gives you time. And as you said, stability.
So it's kind of like the medication is a crutch and a cast all at the same time, in that it carries you over, like a crutch allows you to carry over the land, but it also stabilizes the bone, if you will, by stabilizing that cell receptor and eventually reduces the amount of receptors as a result of the medication. It basically takes those receptors back into dormancy. Is that kind of here?
Well, it gives you the opportunity to do what we're going to talk about next.
Okay.
Okay, because it's just an example to get you thinking in terms of how can I heal from this. The exact way that the opioid crutches work is it gives you time back and it does stabilize the brain because you don't have the craving state anymore. But what's the bottom line issue? Remember, you're not a drug addict. What do you want you to think of yourselves or your family members? What do you want to think of yourselves?
Sleeping endorphin disorder.
Sleeping endorphin disorder works, or hibernating endorphin, even endorphin debt. These are much more user-friendly terms anyways, because it also gets to the point. If you don't produce more endorphins, you're never going to beat this disease. You must produce endorphins. If you're $20,000 in debt and you stop spending money and you never make more money, you'll never cover that debt. We need to get these receptors filled again. Now, over time, the receptors, like a stomach, if you stop overeating, what happens to the size of the stomach?
Will shrink.
They shrink. The receptors go dormant too. They actually start to settle down, like an active volcano settling down. You demonstrate that over time. If your receptors are filled with Suboxone or methadone or medicine like that, it's going to stay active. This is why it's an issue that's very important. It gives you time back. But the cure, what you need to do is to wake up those endorphins again. And this is what we call the jump start. what is the term jumpstart usually used for?
Car batteries,
Right, and what do we usually say those car batteries are?
dead.
If they're dead, could we wake them back up again? No. Actual dead batteries can't be affected by the jump start. Okay? They're not dead, they just need a jolt of energy. Your endorphins aren't dead. They're asleep. They're hibernating. Now let's say you had a kid or a friend who's late for school and it's 5 minutes to the bus. Do you go in and poke them gently and say, "Psst, hey, get up. Time for school"? No, you yell at them, shake them, get up, time for school. We need to shoot some energy into these endorphins with some passion. That's sort of where the dopamine comes in too. It's you get excited for recovery and you work on waking up these endorphins because you're like, oh my gosh, I get it now. I can actually do this. The cure is waking up the endorphins again. They went to sleep. Relapse happens because people don't wake up their endorphins again. They try to quit using, they've got sleeping endorphins, they don't feel like dancing. They don't feel love anymore. They don't have this chemical anymore. Now they don't have their drug anymore. Right? So they use again. Well, of course. Recovery and the cure is waking up those endorphins again. So we got to give jump start to the neuron. I like to put jumper cables on this thing. You wake up the endorphin by jolting those neurons with good energy. In the video that we did, go check it out. Put it on the link there. The addiction cure. We go through all the different ways to do this. You wake up endorphins by doing all the endorphin type activities, and there's a bunch of them. We've come up with dozens and dozens of them. One of them in particular is this wonderful concept called hope. It's one of my favorite studies to discuss. They did a study in which they shocked some students and they poked them with a pin. They created some pain, but they tricked them with some placebos and a bunch of different stuff. And what they found out is that hope itself produces endorphins. So what is an endorphin? What's it called again? Break it down for me.
Endogenous morphine.
Endogenous morphine. It's morphine naturally occurring in the body. What happens to it while you're using actively?
While you're using it, goes to sleep.
Goes to sleep. While it's asleep, and you have all these extra receptors, and you're working in an active addiction, and your friends and family tell you don't have any willpower, and then people tell you that you have a disease, and you're going to have to deal with it the rest of your life. You have a lot of hope?
Nope.
You know? Hope is dope, because hope specifically creates endorphins inside the brain. Everybody likes hope. Just like most people I know like opiates. It feels good. Everybody likes hope. Nobody wishes for hopelessness. Well, hopelessness is when you clear out these receptors. Hope is, I can do this. Now, studies will sometimes suggest that 90% of people in opioid dependence relapse within inside a year. That's what they say. You know what? Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. What I'm going to focus on is the 10% of people who do it right then, or do it correctly. How's that happening for them? What are they doing? I want to focus on them. Let's not talk about how bad of an issue this is. Let's talk about what healing is. Have people healed from opiate dependence before?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You didn't have to have withdrawal anymore. You didn't have to have cravings anymore. You didn't have to use heroin or oxys anymore. You didn't have to steal anymore. All your relationships get better. Would you say that was good?
Yeah.
That's a complete remission of symptoms. See, that's a cure. And that's readily available to you by one thing, endorphin production. When you produce more endorphins again, because you wake them up again, they fill these receptors. They go into the receptor area. The drugs that you had been using, which you're attempting to not use, especially since you're on a medicine, if that's what you're doing, you can decrease the amount of the medicine that you're on. When you produce more endorphins, they'll fit into the receptor. Now you can go down on your Suboxone dose or your methadone dose. You can do that because then endorphins will fit the receptor. I've worked with thousands of people, and every single one of them that have healed or been cured, because a lot of people like that word, I ask them, how did you do it? They'll rattle off for me dozens of things that they've done. I exercised again, I reestablished relationships, I began to dance again, I started to eat better. I found spirituality, I worked with spirituality, I did it for real. Okay? And when you produce hope and all the other virtues which are found in spirituality, things like forgiveness and compassion and kindness and love, and certainly hope, can I emphasize that again and again? When you do that, you produce endorphins. All of this is part of what this jumpstart is. You have to believe this is true. Does this make sense the way I diagrammed it for you? Mm-hmm. And it should become very clear. Again, it's neuroscience, but it's actually fairly easy to understand. Once you know that, it's just a matter of, all right, I got to wake up these endorphins. If it makes sense to you, we got to get started on it. And that's the last thing that we're going to talk about, the butterfly effect. Have you heard of the butterfly effect before?
Yes.
Where have you heard it before?
Movies.
The Ashton Kutcher movie?
Mhm.
What happened in that movie?
One small thing led to a cascade of changes.
Right. Now, I'm not here to do a film study with you. Most people are familiar with that movie, or they've heard this term before. Let me give you the quick background of where this term comes from. If I asked you what the temperature outside is, what's the temperature outside? Take a guess.
Today, 65.
65. What do you think the temperature is?
63?
What do you think it is?
62.
80.
Very
Okay.
optimistic.
Yeah, right. All right, so we got all these different temperatures. Now, why did none of you say, I think it's 65.137 degrees? Or it's 63.2? Or 62.9? Why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say it? If it goes from 65.137 to 65.136, are you going to go, I got to add a sweater?
No,
You're not worried about that, right? Why?
it's too minute.
You'd think it's inconsequential. That's what you'd think. So a scientist by the name of Lorenz, he was a meteorologist back in the 1950s, got his hands on this fun device called a computer. Right? Early stages of computers. What are meteorologists supposed to be doing? Trying to predict weather. So they tried to incorporate computers into their weather prediction, and they ran a bunch of data. And Lorenz did this. And he used specific data. He put a bunch of data into computers to try to predict weather patterns. And what he noticed at one point is he was playing with something called wind velocity. Okay, what's a fast wind velocity? If it's like a hurricane season and you have a meteorologist out there in the wind and he's standing there and the wind's blowing him around, is it like 7 miles per hour?
50 miles per hour.
Or more, yeah. I mean, so that's where you're getting strong gusts around 50. But when Bob the meteorologist is out there in the wind, does he say, it is 97.625 miles per hour? No, he doesn't say that. Why again? Because you'd think it wouldn't matter. 50 miles an hour, that's sufficient. Or 97 miles an hour, that's sufficient. Here's the thing. Lorenz pumped temperature, dew point, barometric pressure, that kind of stuff, and wind velocity into a computer. And he ran 2 computers at the same time with the exact same data, save for one concept. He had a wind velocity of, say, 23.157 miles per hour. And he had the adjacent computer, the one right next to it, 23.158 miles per hour. Okay? A little bit more wind velocity. Absolutely everything else in the computers were running the exact same. And he let these computers run for a while. Initially, what do you think remember, all the other data was the exact same. What did both computers spit out? The same weather prediction? And after a week or so, it kept predicting the same thing, but he let it run. And after 2 weeks, and it's like swoops and swirls and a bunch of different types of weather pattern formations, which I don't understand. You don't need it. It's not going to be in the test. You don't need to understand this part of it. Just recognize this, that after a week, the data had been producing the exact same prediction. But after 2 weeks, there was a fluctuation. There was a little bit of a change in the prediction. And after 3 weeks that he kept running it, what was going to be a rainy day turned out to be a sunny day. All because of a teeny tiny fluctuation of wind. That was it. And he ran this again and again and again. And when he presented this to either computer people or meteorological people, guess what they said? That's ridiculous, let me look at this too. And they ran it, and they ran it. After about 15 years of looking at this, something called the butterfly effect came to be known and well accepted by both mathematicians, meteorologists, computer scientists. It's that what did you say the butterfly effect was again?
A small change cascades into a whole bunch of changes.
That concept is that if a butterfly flaps its wings like the movie starts out with, if a butterfly flaps its wings, say in Texas, a tornado can be caused over in China. And you'd think, what? There's no way. And the science backs it up. It's possible. Then I just demonstrated how. And that's how they did that. Okay? A little change in something like wind, a flap of a butterfly's wing, can lead to a major change later on. Now, are we here practicing to be meteorologists or to predict the weather? What are we here working on? What are we?
Heroin addiction.
There you go. That's what we're working on. So how's the butterfly effect relevant to you? How does it come into play for you in your lives or your loved ones' lives?
We want to help them produce or wake up an endorphin neurotransmitter.
Right, exactly. And you said that's good. Because if I'm in $20,000 of debt and I save $5 today, am I a little closer? And can that $5 savings in a day become a habit where I save $5 the next day, $5 the next day? What happens after a while?
You're describing a compounding effect, and what we're talking about here is not only the use of a medication to help cause a shift in the chemical equilibrium of an individual, but we're also using other methods like finding a better job or improving our relationships or getting some exercise or eating better.
Exactly.
We're taking all these minor changes and accumulating them or compounding them to create that healing effect and instill that sense of hope.
Excellent. Yes. If I'm $20,000 in debt and I can save $50 over there and $100 over there, and I get a job where I make another $1,000 a year, does that all add up?
Yes.
So if I'm in opiate addiction and I'm trying to recover, and I know I need to produce more endorphins, let's say I got to produce 1 million more. 5 there, 5 over there, 5 over there. It adds up after a while. There's the butterfly effect. If we said, man, this makes sense to me, but I'm in such deep debt. How am I going to get out of this? The butterfly effect means if you flap your wings just a little bit, major changes can happen. For me, this all starts with hope. Going from, I can't do this, or this is too difficult, or this disease is killing so many people. And if we switch that over to, I can do this, and that guy over there did it, oh, and I understand how I can do this. You just add a little hope. And you know what you did? You just added a little bit of endorphin to the system. And if the next day you add it, and if the next day you add it, and you keep doing that, and you look, like you said, for all the different ways you can do it, and there's dozens of them, now all of a sudden you're going to have 1 million butterflies flapping their wings. What if I had 100 trillion butterflies flapping their wings? It probably would be a tornado, right? If you start producing a chemical avalanche, or if you seek endorphins with the same amount of passion that you sought your drug. I like to say, opiate addicts don't forget the name of their favorite drug. They don't go to the dealer and say, what would you recommend? Right? They say, I need some heroin and this is how much I need. Right? They know that. And this is how much it costs, and bam, they swing the deal. If you want to recover, you wake up in the morning thinking, where's my endorphins? Where am I going to get me some endorphins? And I need more endorphins than I got yesterday. That's how you recover. If you produce more endorphins, it fills the receptors, the craving state goes away naturally, and you can put away the crutch. And the only problem that this ever was about is that with the absence of endorphins, you're going to have a craving state. We need to reverse that. And it starts with believing you can do it, and then repeating it again and again. How many weeks does it take to develop a habit? Think about this. If you or a loved one used opiates for just 1 or 2 days.
40 days.
That's a good number. Several weeks to develop a habit. Most people, if they actually broke a leg and their doctor prescribes them a painkiller and they use it for just a couple days, do they get hooked?
No.
No. But if you use it for weeks and weeks and weeks, this actually comes into play here. If a very physically fit person eats 2 cheeseburgers in one day, are they going to gain weight? No. But what if they eat 5 cheeseburgers every day for 5 weeks? Probably going to gain some weight. Okay? So it's the same thing on the recovery side. Just having hope now isn't enough. Well, if you walk out of here and you forget it, what good is that? If you walk out of here and lose hope, if you walk out of here and don't look for the exercise or the nutrition or the spirituality or the new job or whatever the case may be, if you don't look for ways to produce more endorphins, it's not going to work. In fact, you can get as high as you want on endorphins. There aren't any side effects there. And it's the wonderful thing about recovery. Everybody that I've seen work end up saying, you know what, I do feel really good. Something happened. I've removed this stuff, that bad stuff, so to speak. I've removed that, and I've learned how to produce more endorphins. It's one of the great benefits of this, is that people that I've worked with, or that anybody out there that's healed, has added so many different things to their life that they didn't have before. You do have to go back to dancing again. You do have to exercise, and you have to eat better, and all that kind of stuff is true. But a lot of people find higher power. You know, they get tapped into spirituality in ways they hadn't before. And so they've added new things. They've produced more endorphins. They've created more chemicals inside their brain. It's a chemical cocktail. Like I said, it's all this stuff, dopamine, endorphins, and GABA. You can do all of that. Yoga, meditation. All of this works to produce these chemicals. And where are they naturally found? Inside your pharmacy. It's always been about you. It's always been the chemical aspect inside your brain. This is why it is a chemical dependence thing. This, by the way, does work with every addiction. Just different chemistry. The receptors do some different things. In the case of cocaine and crack, those types of things, the receptor availability actually diminishes. Imagine if I overate and my stomach got smaller. What would happen then? If I kept eating and eating and eating and my stomach got smaller and smaller and smaller, I wouldn't be able to eat anymore. When somebody overuses cocaine or a stimulant, those receptors for dopamine actually shrink, and now they can't feel their own high, they can't feel their own excitement. This is why they all end up depressed, because their stomachs are gone, okay? Their own dopamine has nowhere to go. And so it's that every single medicine, every single drug has a different type of chemistry thing going on. Today we did opiates. But everybody has a solution. There's a cure for everybody, and it's called balancing the brain. We have to rebalance whatever the neurochemical issue is, whatever your addiction is. We have to rebalance that, and there is a solution for every single person. Yes.
So the receptors actually going away, or you're just filling them with endorphins temporarily? Do they just go away?
It's a great question.
Or is the dependence just because they're being filled separately with endorphins?
That's a great question. The receptors actually never do go away. This is an important thing. Even though I'm a big fan of the word cure, you stay aware the rest of your life that you have this issue. I compare it to a dormant volcano. Now, a dormant volcano is still a volcano, and it can be dangerous if it becomes active again. How do receptors that go inactive, and they go inactive when you stop using them, how do they go inactive? Or how do they regain their active activity if you've stopped them? How do they start again? Feeding it to heroin again, okay? Right. You have to be aware of that. If I reintroduce the opiate into the system, then they're going to wake back up again. But what if I don't? A dormant volcano is just a mountain. Fat cells are like this for people who gain a lot of weight. Fat cells are filled with fat. When you reduce the fat, guess what? The cells don't go away. They just get smaller. The fat's gone, but the cells are still there. Those receptors stay, but they go dormant. And so the effect is still the same. Who cares? I mean, you guys know how many receptors you have in your head? But they're dormant. And did that answer your question?
Yes.
So it'd be like throwing a stick of dynamite down into the volcano and disrupting the stability of that dormant volcano.
That works. Or actually, an earthquake would be a pretty good example there too. You know, you can trigger an earthquake. You can trigger relapse by going back to the things that caused you to use in the first place by reintroducing the drug inside your brain.
You can just wake up the dormant.
Right.
Receptor.
But if you don't reintroduce it, then they stay dormant, and then the effect is the same. If a really thin person has 1 million extra fat cells, can you even tell? Does it matter? No, so you need to stay aware. But remember, a cure is when the symptoms have been reduced or have gone away.
But you maintain enough active receptors to work effectively with the endorphin neurotransmitters that you've wakened
Excellent
up.
point. Yes, exactly. Well, you're just like your body
So you
needs
just
fat.
become balanced.
Yes, very good. You become balanced. Remember, initially I just had one receptor on there. Your brain has 100 billion neurons. There's trillions of receptors. You have to have the right amount. Just like you need the right amount of nutrients in your body, which includes fat. You need some fat. Don't overdo it. You have some endorphin
Withdrawal
receptors.
and craving can therefore go away.
Correct. The answer is balance, right? If you balance it out again, the dormancy thing comes into play. They're there, but they're not active, so what difference does it make? That's sort of like having a credit card with no balance on it. It's there, and you can use it wrong at any time, and you can jack up that balance. But if it's 0% or if it's zero balance, no harm.
So then you can erase disease and write cure.
Yeah, I'll do that for you since you said that. I'd have to redo the diagram all around it.
Oh yeah, I wasn't.
I'm going to do that. No, but it's a good way to end this anyways. That's the idea. Is that when you rebalance this by eliminating all these extra, or making them go dormant, to your question, once they're dormant, then the dependence reduces. The more those extra receptors that go dormant, the dependence then decreases.
So the symptoms are gone.
Yes, correct. Well, because the symptom is when you have an empty receptor saying feed me, that's where the pain and the craving state comes into play. I've seen this described as having 2 children to feed, or 4 children to feed, or 6 children to feed. Does it get a little bit more difficult with each child because you have to keep finding food for each one of them? Absolutely. But if you have the right amount of food for that one child or the 5 children or whatever, that's fine. You gotta make sure you're balanced up here. And you gotta feed him the right thing. Good questions. Anybody else? All right, can we cure? Can your loved ones cure? How do they do that? Show me that you learned.
You wake up, you're sleeping endorphins.
Wake up to sleeping endorphins. Is it useful to say you have a problem and you have a disease and for the rest of your life you have to deal with this? Is there a way to make that useful? Just awareness. You can be aware that this is an issue.
Just be mindful of your future planning so that you can use the butterfly effect of life effectively.
Very well said. If you put that together, you're aware that this is an issue. If I did break a leg, I mean, the rest of my life I might be aware I gotta maybe take it a little easier on that leg, perhaps. Maybe don't go back to the same activities. But once you recognize that this is the way to heal, and you do produce more endorphins, and again, I've seen this hundreds, thousands of times, is that when people start to do it, this is what recovery is. Recovery is producing endorphins, that's it. If what you're doing in recovery isn't producing endorphins, then you're wasting your time.
Well, once you get good at that and it becomes more natural, then you can focus on GABA production or dopamine production and have a more well-balanced overall life and prevent mental illness as well.
Very good. I'm all about producing all these additional receptors. Yes, it's why you want to produce the natural high. That's the ultimate cure. Creating a chemical state for yourself that's balanced and natural, and you don't need the street stuff anymore. Okay, very good. Please check out our other links on this page and come back for more.